So, yesterday we started in the previous session, chapter 10, the nature of fruitive activity. Lord Krishna explains to Uddhav how to become a liberated person, and he starts explaining from the lowest platform, the platform of the Varnashram system, by performing one's karma, that one's activities according to one's psychophysical nature in the Varnashram, and at the same time accepting a spiritual master and following the instructions of the spiritual master, one healthy moves to the platform of Jnana, knowledge. And a part of this knowledge is that we give up all fruitive activities, this karma, kanda, and so on included. And then hopefully today we will start also, we will go into the 11th chapter. And in the 11th chapter we will move from Jnana to Bhakti. So now first we will hear about the nature of this fruitive activities. We will start to discuss today from text 22 till the end of the chapter, and maybe also enter the next chapter. We will go on till 4:15 and then have a break. Let's see where we come. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Antaraye Avihito Yati Dharma Svanustita Tenapi Nichitam Stanam Yata Kachati Tachino. Can someone read the translation, please?
If one performs Vedic sacrifices and fruitive rituals without any mistake or contaminations, one will achieve a heavenly situation in the next life. But even this result, which is only achieved by perfect performance of fruitive rituals, will be vanquished by time. Now hear of this.
So Krishna will explain hereafter all these results are vanquished by time, are results for fruitive endeavor. Srila Prabhupada used the word fruitive. It's not really in the English dictionary, but he made this word fruitive, and it's very clear. They are after the fruits, after the results. So the results obtained by performing fruitive rituals are temporary, because whether good or bad, all material conditions are imperfect. That is the message here. Text 23. Istveya devata jachnai svarlokam yati jachnika punchita deve vattatra pohandivyam nijarchitan. Can someone read, please?
If on earth one performs sacrifices for the satisfaction of the demigods, he goes to the heavenly planets, where, just like a demigod, he enjoys all the heavenly pleasures he has earned by his performances.
Yes, engagement on the heavenly planets is also temporary, and they have to return after exhausting their pious merit. 24. Svapunyo pashite subre vimana pakiyate kandarver vyaran matye devinam ridavishadrik. Translation, please. Can someone read?
Having achieved the heavenly planet, the form of ritual ritualistic sacrifice travel in a glowing aeroplane, which is obtained as the result of his piety on earth, being glorified by song sung by the Gandharvas and dressed in wonderful charming clothes. He enjoys life surrounded by heavenly goddess.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds attractive to some. Stribikama Gajanena Kinkini Janamalina Kridanna Vidatma Patam Surakadesha Nifvita. Somebody read the translation, please? Yeah.
Accompanied by heavenly women, the enjoyer of the fruits of sacrifice goes on pleasure rides in a wonderful airplane, which is decorated with circles of tinkling bells and which flies wherever he desires. Being relaxed, comfortable, and happy in the heavenly pleasure gardens, he does not consider that he is exhausting the fruits of his piety and will soon fall down to the mortal world.
Yeah, the Sanskrit is very interesting. Huh? Yes, tinkling bells, kinkini. When you pronounce the word, you are hearing the bells, kinkini. And then they are falling down. Patam, they are falling. That Sanskrit is very interesting. Text 26. Tavat samadhisvahe yavat punyam samapyate Sina punya patacharya anicchankala chalita. Please read.
Until his pious results are used up, the performer of sacrifice enjoys life in the heavenly planets. When the pious results are exhausted, however, he falls down from the pleasure gardens of heaven, being moved against his desire by the force of eternal time.
By the force of eternal time. Nobody can against it. Yatya dharmarata sangat ashatam vachitandriya kamatma kipano luptaha strena bhutta vihimsaka pasuna vidina lapya prema buddha kananjanan harikanna vasoyantur katvayat ulbanam tamaha karmani tukudahkani kuvatene taipuna Deyam abhajate tatra kim sukham mahcha dharmina. So, please read the translation.
If a human being is engaged in sinful, irreligious activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, then such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. He thus becomes miserly toward others, greedy, and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent and aggressive, and without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected by the darkest moods of nature. In such a degraded body, he unfortunately continues to perform inauspicious activities that greatly increase his future and happiness, and therefore he again accepts a similar material body. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activities inevitably terminating in death?
So what's our conclusion? The Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj concludes, considering all this, one should never aspire for material happiness. Material life is so horrible, because no matter one's duration of life may be, one will still always be afflicted with fear and death. Even Brahma is afraid of death. Considering this, what possible happiness can there be there for conditioned souls? So Brahma lives for 311 trillion 40 billion years. And he's afraid of death. That's interesting. Yeah, text 30. Lokanam lokapalanam madbayam kapachivinam pamanopi bayam matto viparada parayusa. Yeah, can someone read, please?
In all the planetary system, from the heavenly to the hellish, and from all the great demigods who live for 1,000 yoga cycles, there is fear of me in my form of time. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme lifespan of 311 trillion 40 billion years, is also afraid of me.
Yes. That text 31. Gunashinanti karmani gunanashrate gunan jivastu guna samyukto bhunte karma phalam yasa. Let's read the translation.
The material senses create material activity, either pious or sinful, and the mood of nature set the material senses into motion. The living entity, being full engaged by their material senses and moods of nature, experience the various results of fruitive work.
Yes. So the minute independence of the living entity consists of how we choose to associate with the modes of nature. That's our choice. Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj says, unless one comes to the platform of self-realization, he continues to experience lamentation and illusion. The conditioned soul can be liberated if he gives up his separatist mentality and engages in devotional service of the Lord. Every time we act based on upadhis, we are expressing our separatist mentality. If I think I'm a man, I'm separating myself from all the women. If I think I'm American, then I'm separating myself from all other nationalities. So this is separatist mentality. We have to give that up. By the perfection of devotional service, man realizes his original identity of eternal knowledge and bliss, so that he goes to reside in Vaikuntha, eternal abode of the Lord. So, separate existence. It means we do not see Krishna. We do not see our Krishna is controlling material nature. That we try to enjoy Krishna's energy, and we think ourselves independent from Krishna, but Krishna's energies are not independent from Krishna. That so text 32. Yavatsya gunavaishamyam tavananatvam atmanah nanatvam atmano yavat paratantriyam Tadai Vihe. Translation, please.
As long as the living entity thinks that the moods of material nature have separate existence. Please continue, Mataji. He will be obliged to take birth in many different forms and will experience varieties of material existence. Therefore, the living entity remains completely dependent on fruitive activities under the moods of nature.
So that mentality makes him taking birth again and again. When the living entity is forgetful of his relationship with Krishna, he considers this material world the ultimate reality. Yavat asya svatantratvam Dhavadishvarato vayam Yaita samapasirams Temyantasitar pita. Please read the translation.
The conditioned soul who remains dependent on fruitive activities under the material modes of nature will continue to fear me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, since I impose the result of one's fruitive activities. Those who accept the material concept of life, taking the variegatedness of the modes of nature to be factual, devote themselves to material enjoyment and are therefore always absorbed in lamentation and grief.
Yes. So if we have false ego, then we must have lust, anger, greed, and jealousy. So can someone read the second part of the purport starting with Maya as two potencies?
Maya has two potencies. The first covers the living entity, and the second throws him down into a hellish condition. When one is covered by Maya, one loses all power of discrimination, and Maya then throws such a fool into the darkness. When one wrongly considers oneself to be independent of the Supreme Personality of God, one becomes a worshipper of temporary material objects, hoping to enjoy material gratification, and as one grows older, one's life becomes filled with fear and anxiety. A conditioned soul considers himself to be in control of his life, but since he does not have any actual controlling potency, his situation is contradictory and not at all easy. As all of one's material possessions are taken away by time, one becomes filled with lamentation. All in all, material life is truly abominable, and it is only because of dense illusion that we accept it as such.
Yes, that was text 33, Maya as two potencies. The first is the Maya covers ones with ignorance, and the second is Maya is going to drag you down, that to lower levels of consciousness, to hellish conditions. That it's not a satisfactory life. 34. Kala atma kamo loka svabhavo dharmaivasha iti mam bauta prahur kuna vyati kare sati. Read the translation, please.
When there is agitation and interaction of the material modes of nature, the living entities then describe me in various ways, such as all-powerful time, the self, Vedic knowledge, the universe, one's own nature, religious ceremonies, and so on.
Yeah. So if we have the purport here, Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj. When the intelligence of the conditioned soul is covered by the eternal energy of the Lord, he forgets the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In such a condition, some people refer to him as time, some refer to him as the Vedic literature, some refer to him as nature, and some refer to him as religious principles. In this way, various fragmental understandings of the purposes of the Lord are understood. That there's 34, right? And we have here 35. Si udavacha gunes vartamano pidea yes anapavita guner sabatyate dehi batyate vagatam vibo. So please read.
Sri Uddhava said, O my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature, and the happiness and distress that are born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that it is not bound by the material encirclement? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then how is he ever bound by material nature?
So, what did we hear in this chapter until now? In the beginning, by following Varnashram, one gets knowledge. And now we have heard, do not try to enjoy piously. Do not follow karma kanda. And now Uddhav is asking two questions. And these two questions will be answered in the next chapter. That how to go from the conditioned state to the liberated state. And that, so, the last two verses of this chapter, Katam varteta viharet kairva chaknyeta lakshanai kim bhujito tavisrichek chaita sitayativa eta asyutta me bhumi bhuhi Pashnam Pashna Vidambara Nitya Bhado Nitya Mukta Kaya Eveti Me Brahma. Read the translation, please.
O my Lord Achyuta, the same living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned and at another time as eternally liberated. I'm not able to understand, therefore, the actual situation of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are experts in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways will they remain situated? Enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about.
Hare Krishna. The commentary by Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj first. That, so since the living entity is sometimes called eternally conditioned, how could he ever be considered eternally liberated and vice versa? That's the question here. So it's an apparent contradiction, which will be cleared up by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's asking between the complex relationship between the soul and the entanglement in the illusory energy. And that we will hear in the next chapter. But before we go, we weer the commentary, Bhaktivedanta. Uddhav says, as long as the conditioned soul identify themselves as products of matter, they continue to remain conditioned by the illusory energy. As soon as they are free from this misconception, they become liberated from material bondage. If this is a fact, how can I recognize who is liberated and who is conditioned? So he's asking here about symptoms of conditioned and liberated souls. And Uddhav goes on to say, both liberated and conditioned souls eat, pass, stool, and urine, sleep, sit, walk, and talk. How can I recognize who is performing these activities under the direction of the modes of nature, and who is acting free from Maya's influence? Personalities like Dattatreya and Bharat were eternally liberated souls, whereas Devadatta and Jahyadatta were eternally conditioned souls. Since their body activities appear similar, I'm confused, being unable to differentiate between them. Therefore, please tell me how one can recognize an eternally conditioned soul, an eternally liberated soul. In Chaitanya Charitamrita it's stated, Shivera Srupa Krishna Nitya Das Krishneya Tatasta Sakti Beda Beda Bakash. In the living, it is the living entity's constitutional position to be an eternal servant of Krishna, because he is in the marginal energy of Krishna, and a manifestation simultaneously one and different from the Lord. Krishna Bulisa Jiva Anadi Bhayir Mukha Ataiva Maya Tara Deya Samsara Dukkha. By forgetting Krishna, the living entity has become materialistic since time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy of Krishna is given him different types of miseries in material existence. Conditioned and liberated soul, conditioned and liberated, both these states are adjectives. These two natures, when seen from a different angle, are known by two different names. According to the difference in the propensity of service, the conditioned and liberated states are ascertained. When one is manifested, the other disappears. Thus ends the translation of the 4th chapter of the Uddhav Gita, entitled The Nature of Fruitive Activity, with the commentaries of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and chapter summary and purpose of Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur. So now we move to a new chapter, the chapter where we will go from Jnana to Bhakti, and we will hear that Lord Krishna will explain in this chapter that factually the soul is never conditioned or liberated. The soul has nothing to do with material energy. We will hear about that. So in this chapter, the purpose of Jnana is, as will be clearly described, so this chapter is an answer on Arjun's question here that we just read. I read it once again so that we understand. this is the question, and then next chapter is the answer. O my Lord, Achyuta, the same living entity, sometimes described as eternally conditioned, sometimes as eternally liberated, I am not able to understand, therefore, the actual situation of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways would they remain situated, enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about? That, so now we go back to our first verse. So in this chapter, yes, it will be explained how a living entity can be Nitya Baddha and Nitya Siddhi. How he can be Nitya Baddha, eternally liberated, and then become Nitya Siddhi, eternally. So how a living entity can become Nitya Baddha, eternally conditioned, and then can become Nitya Siddhi, eternally liberated. How can one go from one to the other? So in this chapter, Lord Krishna explains first, he will explain the different characteristics of conditioned and liberated life. That's the first thing we will hear, the different characteristics. And then after that we will hear the symptoms by which one can recognize a saintly person. And then a third, Lord Krishna will speak about various processes of devotional service at the end of the chapter. So these three things, first the difference between conditioned and liberated souls, what are the characteristics and the symptoms of both, and then the symptoms of a saintly person, how can we recognize a saintly person, and then various processes of devotional service. So the pure spirit soul is never entangled in the material energy of the Lord. The soul has practically nothing to do with the modes. The modes of nature are considered to be ropes that bind the conditioned soul, but the soul is never entangled in the material energy. So the living entity imagines a false connection with the three modes. That's what happened. And accepts the material body as the self. And Lord Krishna will compare it to a dream. That living entity, in a dream, the living entity suffers the consequences of his own imagination, just as we suffer the activities in a dream. So we have dream suffering, dream happiness. So the living entity's dream of being part and parcel of the material world. We think ourselves part and parcel of the material world. And that's a dream, a very bad dream. And that drags him into the contradictory state which is called material conditioned life. Because there is ultimately no permanent connection between the living entity and matter. There is no actual liberation. If you are not conditioned, you cannot become liberated. There is no actual liberation, Krishna will say in this chapter. So the living entity, being eternally transcendental to the inferior material energy of Lord Krishna, is eternally liberated. The term Baddha or bound up may be used to indicate the nature of the living entity's experience with the inferior energy of the Lord. So therefore, the terms bondage and liberation, nitya bada, nitya siddhi or liberated, that these terms only refer to temporary situations created by illusion, and they do not refer to the ultimate nature of the living entity. So we will start with reading text 1. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Bhado Mukta iti Vakya Kunato me vastuta Punasya Maya Mulatvam Nami Moksha Nabandhanam. Please read the translation.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Uddhav, due to the influence of the material modes of nature, which are under my control, the living entity is sometimes designated as conditioned and sometimes as liberated. In fact, however, the soul is never really bound up or liberated. And since I am the Supreme Lord of Maya, which is the cause of the modes of nature, I am also never to be considered liberated or in bondage."
Okay. We will hear the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti and Srila Bhaktivedanta. In this chapter, the Lord describes the Uddhav characteristics of conditioned and liberated souls, the symptoms by which one can recognize saintly person and the limbs of devotional service. The Lord tells Uddhav that his question is unnecessary because the soul is never really bound by material nature. It is simply an illusion to think that the material body, which is created by the influence of the three modes of material nature, is a self. Only due to illusion does the living entity suffer, just as one experiences distress in a dream. Of course, material nature is not an illusion, it actually exists, just as living entity also exists, both being potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the dream that he is part of material nature that constitutes the illusion of the living entity. The soul is never actually bound because its existence is always superior to that of matter. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of all potencies. It is only by speculation that the ignorant, conditioned souls imagine that the Lord is devoid of variegatedness. Although the living entity is part and parcel of the Lord's superior potency, he identifies with the inferior potency of the Lord and thus experiences conditioned life. The living entity is liberated when contacts the superior energy of the Lord, and the superior energy of the Lord has three divisions: Ladini, spiritual pleasure; Sandini, eternal existence; and Samvit, all-pervading knowledge. The Lord's existence is Satchitananda, and he never comes forgetful. The living entities, however, being minute in quantity, are sometimes conditioned and sometimes liberated. The neutral state of the three modes of nature is called pradhan. When the three modes of material nature interact, they compete for control over the tiny living entities, and thus creating a variety of manifestations. When the conditioned soul desires to free himself from the entanglement caused by the modes of material nature, he must take to devotional service of the Lord, which can elevate him to the spiritual world. In the spiritual sky, everyone possesses spiritual bodies that are not subject to change. Such a liberated state of existence, there is no possibility of being influenced by the three modes of material nature. So, Lord Krishna explains here that, the soul can never be bound by the modes. The Lord can never be bound by the Lord. and also the spirit soul can never be bound. So I want to go with you now to a little detour. Canto 2, chapter 9, text 2. Baupa ivabati maya. Yeah, that is text 2, yeah. Maya ya baupaya. Kamamano gunasasya. Mama miti manyate. The illusion, living entity appears in so many forms offered by external nature of the Lord that while enjoying in the modes of material nature, the engaged living entity misconceives thinking in terms of I and mine. That, yeah. Now it's in the next one. Now. So Srila Prabhupada gave a lecture of this verse and says, we are not in contact with material nature, Srila Prabhupada says in that lecture. Simply, we need to be awakened. Interesting. That go back to the 11th text 2. Sukam moha sukam dukam teyapatis samayaya svapno yata manakyati samsritirna tu vastavi. Someone reads just as a dream.
Just as a dream is merely a creation of one's intelligence, but has no actual substance, similarly, material lamentation, illusion, happiness, distress, and the acceptance of the material body under the influence of Maya are all creations of my illusory energy. In other words, material existence has no essential reality. Thank you.
Yeah. Lamentation. I was just reading Mahabharata, and at the end, after the Battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna, I think he speaks to Yudhishthira Maharaj and said, lamentation will not help, that will not bring the death back to life. It doesn't help lamentation. That it's all a creation for the illusory energy, it is said here. So the painful experience of the conditioned souls who are trying to enjoy material sense gratification are meant to help him to turn back to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the purpose of the material creation is to bring the living entity back to the loving devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, nothing works out finally in material nature. Therefore, even the sufferings of the material world may be seen as the transcendental mercy of the Lord. That is a transcendental vision. The temporary real is factually unreal. It's like being a millionaire for 1/8 of a second. So by subtle knowledge here, by practice of this subtle knowledge, the jnani knows how to separate himself from material existence and does not engage himself in any karma. Dat is de jnani. So, we are going to text 3. Vidya vidye mamatano vidyudava sharirinam moksha bandha kariyatye mayayame vinirmite. Please read.
O Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansion of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings.
So, knowledge awards perpetually liberation and ignorance bondage. That them both are products of Maya. So what's the point here? As Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport. No, it's not Srila Prabhupada, and followers of Srila Prabhupada. By the expansion of vidya or knowledge, a conditioned soul is liberated from the clutches of Maya. And similarly, by the expansion of avidya or ignorance, the conditioned soul is driven further into the illusion of bondage. When all of the Lord's potencies are correctly perceived in their proper categories, the living entity is liberated from material bondage and return to his blissful eternal residence in the spiritual sky. So we will hear Vishwanath who Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj's commentaries on this verse 3. It may be questioned how Maya, being illusion, can influence the eternal spirit soul. How does she do that? The answer is that both knowledge and ignorance are two manifestations of the Lord's powerful energy, and which are the causes of liberation and bondage. Knowledge awards liberation and ignorance causes bondage. Being creations of the external energy of the Lord, knowledge and ignorance are beginningless, unlimited, and inexhaustible. In the Vedic literature, it is described that the Supreme Lord has an eternal energy known as Maya, which manifests in three features: Vidya, Avidya, and Pradhan. Pradhan creates the material world. Avidya creates the conditioned soul's misconceptions, and Vidya removes those misconceptions and awards enlightenment. May you remember in Shis Upanishad, Vidya and Avidya. Vidya gives one result, Avidya gives another result, and three meanings of Vidya and Avidya. The Bhaktivedanta. The living entity, being the marginal potency of the Lord, can exist under the shelter of either knowledge or ignorance. So, he can connect with the internal or the spiritual energy. With the material energy, we connect to false ego. With the spiritual energy, by acting in real ego. So when living entity takes shelter of Vidya, he remains in the liberated condition, and we take shelter of Avidya, he remains in bondage. So that's our free will. We can take shelter of Vidya or Avidya. Vidya and Avidya are the two eternal energies of the Supreme Lord. Followers of the Vishishtadvaita philosophy address the living entities as Chit and the material world as Achit. According to the Vedic statement, Yata Baso Yata Tamha, Srila Jiva Goswami has described the living entity as Jiva Maya and Matter as Guna Maya. It is the mistaken identification of the living entities with matter that causes illusory matter. material existence or ignorance. When living entities can see himself as a superior energy of the Lord, giving up misidentification with the inferior potency of matter, he can return to his blissful condition in the spiritual sky. Good. That's deep philosophy. Deep philosophy and very simple at the same time, but difficult to practice for us. We think ourselves conditioned as a part of this material world. Text 4. Ekasyaiva mamam sasya shivasyaiva mahamate bandhusvadi yayantradir vichaya satatara. Somari, please.
O most intelligent Uda, the living entity called Jiva is part and parcel of me, but due to ignorance, he has been suffering in material bondage since time immemorial. By knowledge, however, he can be liberated.
Yeah, so Krishna repeats it again here. So vidya means liberated, avidya conditioned. The soul is not influenced, it is the consciousness that is influenced. That is influenced by material nature, it's a consciousness, not the soul. That, so, yes, Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj, right. The Supreme Lord is one without a second, and innumerable living entities, both conditioned and liberated, are his eternal fragmented parts and parcels. The conditioned souls have been under the influence of avidya since time immemorial. However, with the help of vidya, they can attain liberation. Although the parts and parcels of the Lord are sometimes liberated and sometimes conditioned, there is no question of conditioning or liberation for the Lord himself. Avidya and vidya can exert their supremacy over the parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, but not the Lord himself. So avidya and vidya cannot influence the Lord. It's us. Text 5. Atabadasya muktasya vailakamsham vadamite vyoda dharminostata stitayo ekadharmini. Read the translation, please.
Thus, my dear Udava, in the same material body, we find opposing characteristics, such as great happiness and miseries. That is because both the Supreme Person of Godhead, who is eternally liberated, as well as the conditioned soul, are within the body. I shall now speak to you about their different characteristics.
Yeah, that's text 5. Opposing characteristics in the material state, happiness and distress. Why is it opposing? Because, yes, for the spirit soul, this happiness and misery, this material world, is unknown. There's nothing to do with it. It's because this happiness and misery is an illusion coming from false ego, identifying with the body. But Krishna will explain more deeply now. He will speak about their different characteristics that okay. We'll hear now Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj from this verse. when the respective symptoms of the conditioned souls and liberated souls are carefully considered, there appears to be two contradictory natures. The conditioned state is full of lamentation and the liberated state is boundless happiness. The supersoul is the control of all energies and the spirit soul, being the marginal energy, is always controlled. That explains the verse more clearly. But because of our pride coming from this false ego, we don't want to listen to the advice of the super soul. 6. Saparnaveta satvisha sakaya yatrichayeta kritanita savikshe ekastayoka tati pipalanam anyo nirano pipale naboyan. Can someone read the translation?
By chance, two birds have made a nest together in the same tree. The two birds are friends and are of a similar nature. One of them, however, is eating the fruits of the trees, whereas the other, who does not eat the fruits, is in a superior position due to his potency.
Yeah, that's Vetter Upanishad. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that here. But now, the second paragraph. Thus the Lord is nirvana, or uninterested in the bitter fruits of material activities, whereas the ordinary conditioned soul busily consumes such bitter fruits, thinking them to be sweet. Ultimately, the fruit of all endeavor is death, but the living entity foolishly thinks that material things will bring him pleasure. The word Sakyaya, or two friends, is also significant. Our real friend is Lord Krishna, who is situated within our heart. Only he knows our actual needs, and he can give us real happiness. So at the end of the purport, we have Svetasvatara Upanishad. There are two birds in one tree. One is eating the fruits of the tree, while the other is witnessing the actions. The witness is the Lord, and the fruit eater is a living entity. That you remember when we were in the 10th canto, I think it was chapter 86, where Lord Krishna went from Dwarka and he visited two of his devotees, King Baulasva and Shrutadev. And when Shrutadev saw Lord Krishna coming, he started to dance out of joy. He said, it said to Krishna, since time immemorial you are in my heart, and I see you in my heart, but now finally I see you in person. I see you before me. I was dancing out of joy. So that means one who is enlightened with this knowledge, he does not see himself as this machine. He thinks but he observes the machine, but he does not think himself to be the machine. So a self-realized person, an enlightened person, does not experience himself as the body. He is free from the contamination of material nature. Text 7. Atmanam manyam sasaveda vidvam api palado natupi palada yovityayas yuk satunitya bado vidya mayaya satunitya mukta. Someone reads the translation, please.
The bird who does not eat the fruits of the tree is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who, by his omniscience, perfectly understands his own position and that of the conditioned living entity, represented by the eating bird. That living entity, on the other hand, does not understand himself or the Lord. He is covered by ignorance and is thus called eternally conditioned, whereas the personality of Godhead, being full of perfect knowledge, is eternally liberated.
Okay. So in his purport, Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj quotes Gopal Tapani Upanishad. We will read this purport. The Supersoul knows himself as well as the living entities, and he does not eat the bitter fruit of the tree of material existence. The conditioned living entity, on the other hand, who tries to enjoy the fruits of his labor, neither knows himself nor the Supreme Lord. These living entities are eternally conditioned, whereas the Supersoul is eternally full of knowledge. The word vidya in this verse refers to the eternal spiritual knowledge of the Supreme Lord, which is distinct from material knowledge. In the Gopal Tapani Upanishad it is stated, there are two birds living as friends in the same tree, the living entity and the Supersoul. The living entity is a separated part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and he enjoys the fruits of his fruitive actions. The Supersoul is a plenary portion of the Supreme Lord, and he witnesses the actions of the living entity. So there is always a distinction between the Supreme Lord, who is the supreme controller, and the living entity, who are his eternal servants. The Lord is the master of all potencies, and the living entities are subordinate to him. The Lord does not enjoy the fruits of karma, and is omniscient. The living entity enjoys the fruits of his own karma and is ignorant. Due to ignorance, the living entity has been conditioned since time immemorial. If he reinstates himself as a servant of the Supreme Lord, then by the influence of spiritual knowledge he becomes eternally liberated. In his conditioned state of existence, the living entity enjoys by acting piously and suffers by acting impiously. In the liberated state of existence, there is no question of piety or impiety, because one is fully devoted to the Supreme Lord and is not attached to the fruits of karma. Attachment to the fruits we had heard before. So, yes, in the purport here, it is said, Bhagavad Gita 4.5 is mentioned. In Bhagavad Gita 4.5, the Lord explains his superior inner knowledge to Arjuna. Bahuni me vyatitani janmayata vicharana tanyam vida sarvani natvam veda parantapa. The Blessed Lord said, many births both and you have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, a subduer of the enemy. So the term bada or bond is also understood to refer to the living entity's eternal dependence upon the Lord, either in the conditioned or the liberated state. So in the kingdom of, in the liberated states, where was I? No, I lost. Liberation means freedom from the miseries of life, but never freedom from one's loving relationship with Lord Krishna, which is the essence of one's material existence, of one's eternal existence. According to Srila Madhvacharya, the Lord is the only eternally free living entity, and all the other living entities are eternally dependent and bound to the Lord, either through blissful, loving service or to the bondage of Maya. So either we are connected with Krishna and we are free from this influence of material nature, free from this so-called conditioning, or we are controlled by the bondage of Maya, but we are controlled. So the conditioned soul should give up tasting the bitter fruits of the tree of material existence, That means it depends on us. Do we want to give it up and turn to his dearmost friend, Lord Krishna, who is sitting within his heart? There is no pleasure equal or greater than the pleasure of pure devotion service to the Lord, and by tasting the fruit of love of God, the liberated living entity enters an ocean of happiness. So, that means, yes, we don't see our family as Maya, but we see our family as belonging to Krishna, and therefore do not neglect them. So that's a practical result of applying this knowledge. That, so text 8. Deasto pina deasto vitvan svapnat yato tita adeasto pideasta pumati svapnatihyata. So I read text 8.
One who is enlightened in self realization, although living within the material body, sees himself as transcendental to the body, just as one who has arisen from a dream gives up identification with the dream body. A foolish person, however, although not identical with his material body but transcendental to it, thinks himself to be situated in the body, just as one who is dreaming sees himself as situated in an imaginary body.
Good. Can someone read the purple, please?
In Lord Krishna's discussion of different characteristics of liberated and conditioned souls, the Lord first clarified the distinction between eternally liberated personality of Godhead and the marginal potencies, the innumerable jivas, who are sometimes conditioned and sometimes liberated. In this and the next 9 verses, the Lord describes the different symptoms of liberated and conditioned jiva souls. In a dream, one sees oneself in an imaginary body, but upon waking one gives up all identification with that body. Similarly, one who has awakened to Krishna consciousness no longer identifies with the gross or subtle material body, nor does he become affected by the happiness and distress of material life. On the other hand, a foolish person, Kumati, does not awaken from the dream of material existence and is afflicted with innumerable problems due to false identification with gross and subtle material bodies. One should become situated in one's eternal spiritual identity, Nitya Swarupa. By properly identifying oneself as the eternal servant of Krishna, one becomes released of his false material identity, and therefore the miseries of illusionary existence immediately cease. Just as the anxiety of a troublesome dream ceases as soon as one awakens to his normal pleasant surroundings. It should be understood, however, that the analogy of awakening from a dream can never be applied to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is never in illusion. The Lord is eternally awake and enlightened in his own unique category called Vishnu Tattva. Such knowledge is easily understood by one who is Vidwan or enlightened in.
Thank you. We see that this Uddhav Gita is like a second Bhagavad Gita, but it's going much deeper on some points. Because in Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, Krishna asked for the symptoms of a Stita Prajna, a liberated soul. And also, that's in the second chapter, but also in the 14th chapter, he's asking again, how can I recognize someone who has transcended the modes? Please give the symptoms. And Krishna will explain it in the next 9 verses. The difference between so-called conditioned and liberated souls. But these 9 verses we will discuss tomorrow, if Krishna willing, that and hopefully, yeah, probably we will discuss the rest of the chapter. Let's see how far we come. But before breaking up now, I want to read the purport of Bhaktivedanta Saraswati on this verse. It says, although the subject matter of a dream may remain fresh in the mind of a person when he wakes up, the illusory nature of the dream is immediately realized by him. However, those who are sleeping in the lap of material nature cannot realize the illusory nature of their existence until they awaken by means of self-realization. The seer himself is eternal, but his dreams at night and his experience during the day are of no lasting importance, but being no better than a phantasmagoria. So, it's 11 past 4. Let's resume at 20 past 4, 9 minutes for some discussion. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
So we can resume that.
Recording in progress.
So the spirit soul is never entangled to material nature, Lord Krishna says. The soul has nothing to do with material nature. We are imagining a false connection with the three modes of nature. Therefore we accept the body as the self. So, it seems simple, right? We are never entangled in material nature. We are just imagining, so come out of it, but Vidya, is it so simple? Any comment? Yes, Mother Sitaram, please.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances.
My basis.
No, Maharaj, not easy at all. Even after reading all this, it is not easy to shake off this entanglement of the material world. Even if knowing that we're not really entangled in a dream, still it seems so real. And it's very difficult to shake it off.
Yeah. But it seems so real, yeah. But at least we have the knowledge that it's not real. Realizing this knowledge is something else. It is one step forward. Yes. Thank you, Mother Sitarani. Pavitra Prabhu, please.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, I want to refer you to the first chapter we read, chapter 11, text number 60. Canto 11, text number 10, verse 36 to 37.
Yeah.
Translation at the end. In what various way will they remain situated, enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about? We had a story in the fourth canto when Rishabhadev become an Avaduta, so being disturbed, and when he evacuates, his evacuation was having nice aroma. And we see in the 10th canto, when Putana was being killed by Krishna and he was cremated, his body was bringing out nice fragrance. So does it mean that Vrishabhadev was a liberated soul, and Putana was a Nitya.
Yeah, you mentioned. Now, King Rishabhadev became a liberated soul, and Putana became also a liberated soul when she was killed by Krishna. That in that way they became both liberated. That of course Putana, she was. It goes back to Palimat's pastime when she saw Lord Vamandev. She was so attracted to him, she wanted to love him, but then she hated him also because, anyway, the two aspects were there, but Krishna, it shows Krishna accepts only the good part, our devotion, our love. That yes, they got both liberation. I don't know the fragments of the body of Bhutan. It was smelling, nicely. That, I cannot comment on that. It's Krishna's inconceivable pastimes. I didn't read any comments there on that of the Acharyas, but it's interesting that you make the connection. Good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yes, Mother Prabhupada Priya, please.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I have a question in relation to text 8 from chapter 11, where it says at the end, this translation second part says, a foolish person, however, although not identical with his material body, but transcendental to it, thinks himself to be situated in the body, just as one who is dreaming sees himself as situated in an imaginary body. So this phrase, thinks himself to be situated in the body, seems to be implying that I'm not actually in this body.
Yeah.
So is that the situation, that as souls here, we are not only are we not the body, but we're not even in a material body?
Well, it is explained by Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Maharaj. It says, yes, we are in the body, and we think ourselves in the body, but we are it's like someone who wakes up from a dream and he understands the nature of the dream. So when we are enlightened, we may still be in the body, but we understand. We understand, yes, we are not this body. We have nothing to do with it at the same time. That this is not real life. This is not real life. My real life is in my connection with Krishna. And that is waking up from the dream. But to wake up from the dream, one must live in a connection with Krishna. And that will be explained further in this chapter. Krishna will explain hereafter how to connect. He will further explain in this chapter how to connect with the spiritual energy. And then finally comes to devotional service, acting as a spirit soul. So that is, yes, it's a high level that one wakes up from a dream. This is not my real life. It does not mean that just by thinking I'm not this body, and I understand I'm not this body, that one is liberated from the body. No, the material nature is there. Your body continues run out this karma. But that dissolves because that dissolves the subtle body. Subtle body, material subtle body means false ego. And it dissolves that. Because factually, whether we are under the spiritual energy or the material energy, we are still under control of Krishna. And Krishna controls these modes of material nature. But we are not identifying ourselves with this body, and we become the observer. And then a devotee uses the body in Krishna's service. It's like waking up. It's not a sudden process, waking up. It takes a while to wake up from this bad dream, because we remain attached to so many things in this world, and that keeps us in the dream. And we have to give up the attachment. Because you have the knowledge, yes, but then you have the attachment. Means we hear in the previous chapter, these fruitive activities, it's useless. So give it up. And we heard it so many times. Still we did not give it up completely. That it's still in the process of doing that. But Krishna gives us this knowledge, and this knowledge is a vision of reality. And when we understand it, yes, it makes sense that all this strife for things in this material world is useless. That's what I could say. Hare Krishna. Any further comments, Mother Prabhupada?
I was thinking that this process of waking up is it's a gradual process. It's like, when you're waking up in the morning, you're there's a period where you're like still kind of asleep, but you're awake, but you're half asleep, half awake, and you're just kind of like a little groggy, for some period of time. So I feel like having received this knowledge and having, practiced it for many years, you get some glimpses of reality, from time to time, but then you kind of like doze off again into sleep, and then and then you start hearing the birds singing again, like the morning is coming, but then you doze off again. It's kind of like, as devotees, we're sort of in that groggy state of grogginess where we're not exactly totally in a deep sleep, but we're not fully awake either.
Yeah. It's a bit dangerous situation between that state between. But anyway, that the safety. Therefore, Krishna will give us this process of devotional service, different forms of devotional service, and then we act as a spirit soul, and that will keep us keep going on, purifying our existence, and come to realize this knowledge. That because therefore the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the study of Srimad Bhagavatam brings us to that point. Because the Srimad Bhagavatam is about a man to die. Maharaj makes it. We are all meant to die. And it's good if we put ourselves in this position. Maybe I've only 7 days. What am I going to do? And by everything you do, you ask that question. I'm only 7 days. Is that a thing to do? And that will change your life by hearing this knowledge. That the process of hearing the Bhagavatam is life-changing. And that's in itself the process. That. Thank you, Mother. Mother Kasturica, please.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I have two questions. In the
Yeah.
7th chapter, the first sloka, Krishna says, neither conditioned or liberated are they're not really bound up or liberated. But if you see many religions practiced in this world, is the main objective is getting liberated. You know, moksha is the final point. And even in the Vaishnava Sampradaya, also moksha has been emphasized a lot. So how do we put both the things in a right perspective?
Yeah, I would say moksha or liberation in the Vaishnava tradition has a different meaning than moksha in for the impersonalist, for the jnanis. Moksha for the jnanis means becoming one with Brahman, that emerging into Brahman. And moksha for the Vaishnava means he understands there are 5 forms of moksha. That being, there is the liberation of the soul, Sayuja Mukti, coming so-called one, merging or entering into Brahman. Then you have Samipya, Salokya. You have 4 other kinds of liberation. Living at the same planet as the Lord, getting the same opulence as the Lord, living in the association of the Lord, getting the same Sarupya, the same form as the Lord. So that's another liberation. And that's forms of liberation. So we understand there are these higher forms of liberation. A devotee, where we heard last time that he finds this merging with sauja, that is for a devotee is hellish. So is the thought of it, because he wants to serve the Lord, and when you merge with Brahman, you cannot serve the Lord, so the devotee rejects that. And he accepts these higher forms of liberation. And that is our constitutional position. We are part and parcel of Krishna, means we have to serve Krishna. But we think ourselves part and parcel of this material world. And the scientists become so absorbed in it, they think, we are part and parcel of the material world. So consciousness must come from matter, and they try to prove that. But they never come to the point of proving that. So liberation has different meanings. That in its restricted meaning for the impersonalists is sauja. But they don't recognize these higher forms of liberation because Krishna does not exist. But at the other side, liberation means also a stage in our process. It's the process of Nishtha, is coming Nishtha, studying devotional service. When you become peaceful and don't lament anymore, and don't make plans in this material world, then you have realized the position of the spirit soul. And then from there on, we develop devotion and become qualified to go back to the spiritual world. So that's a higher stage. So the moksha, which is described by the impersonalist, is factually a material desire. It's to become free from suffering, that's all, and peaceful. And they think they become God by merging with Brahman. That's a material desire. Therefore, the Bhagavatam starts with rejecting Dharma projita kaiva dharma, kaitava dharma, cheating religion. Cheating religion is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. That must be rejected. And then we come to the higher. And that makes the Bhagavatam special. It prepares you to go back to the spiritual world. But this impersonal moksha, we remain here. Does that help?
And also my second question. In verse 3, Krishna puts the knowledge as part of the avidya. But
As part of the?
He says knowledge is also part of avidya.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both knowledge and ignorance are the products of Maya. So he puts them in the category of avidya. And then in 4th verse, he says that by knowledge, however, one can be liberated.
Yeah.
So, so the knowledge initially what Krishna is talking about, is it just material knowledge or transcendental knowledge? Because transcendental knowledge can never give liberation. Right?
Yeah. So this avidya and vidya, the difference between understanding, knowledge is the understanding the difference between body and spirit. So that helps us to liberate us, this knowledge, understanding that difference. But once you are liberated, then this knowledge is like avidya, because you don't need it anymore, because it's based on an illusion that we are conditioned or liberated. And Krishna says in the beginning, the spirit soul is never conditioned or liberated. That we think we are conditioned or liberated because we think ourselves part and parcel of this material world. So that's interesting. So nobody in the spiritual world is interested to know the difference between the body and the soul, because they are all spiritual. That doesn't make sense for them. For them, it's like avidya. You understand? So you have these different levels of understanding. But of course, for us, this knowledge will help us to liberate. It's very useful to give up that idea that we are part and parcel of this material world. And then if you realize that, you get spiritual vision. That this is explained in Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, text 8 to 12. That one in a divine vision sees that there's nothing doing on at all. And that he sees the hands are moving, the body is moving, is eating, sleeping, so many things. But he becomes the observer. He sees Krishna is doing that, material nature. So that's the point. We think ourselves that we are controlling, but everything is controlled by Krishna. 5 factors of action, and 4 are Krishna doing. Our doing is very little. But that our doing in the material world is wrong. Because we think ourselves the doer. We think ourselves the body doing things. But that's not like that. That we are only desiring. And by that desire from the soul comes from the misunderstanding, I'm a part and parcel of this material world. I'm this body, I'm a part of this world. It's so difficult to cut in that knowledge, but that's the function of the spiritual master, to cut in that, in our misunderstandings, in our misgivings. Does that help? Thank you. So, the Prabhupada, Priya, please.
Maharaj, I became a little confused here by the explanation of Badha given in the purport to text 7, because, you know, in the Bhagavad Gita and also here, we hear that there are two types of living beings, Nitya Siddha or Nitya Mukta and Nitya Badha. But then it's kind of making it seem like there's only, that all living beings are Nitya Badha in the sense that they're bound to the Lord, either in ignorance, that they're dependent on the Lord, either in the conditioned or liberated state, and that the only one who is Nitya Mukta is the Lord himself, because he's the only one who's independent.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
yeah. So we are, but that's very subtle, because this Nitya Baddha in this explanation means that we are under the control of the Lord eternally. We are under the control of the Lord eternally, either through his spiritual energy, which has three parts, Vyod, Dadini, Samvit, and it's Samvit.
Sandini.
And Sandini, eternal existence, eternal knowledge, eternal bliss. That so we are either under the influence of his spiritual energy or his material energy. In that sense, everyone is Nitya Baddha. That even the essence of the spiritual world. But the other meaning is, of course, Nitya Baddha means that we are under influence of this false ego, and our consciousness is influenced by the modes of nature by which we think ourselves part and parcel of the material world. Therefore, we are Nitya Baddha. And Srila Prabhupada explains in another part that Nitya Baddha means we eternally conditioned. But that does not mean we have to remain eternally conditioned. It means we cannot trace back the history, how we became conditioned. But then we can become Nitya Siddhi, if by the process of devotional service. But if one becomes Nitya Siddhi, then one is situated in false ego again, in real ego again. It's given up the false idea that I'm part and parcel of the material world. One acts as part and parcel of Krishna, which is devotional service. And by that one becomes Nitya Siddhi, eternally liberated. So it's different meanings in different contexts here. But it is good to understand that if we are liberated, if we are going back to the spiritual world, we are still under the control of Krishna's spiritual energy. And we have heard from that different Shaktis, Yoga Maya, Lila Shakti, so many things that, but it is all blissful. But it's an important point. Thank you for helping us to clarify that. Anything else? Good. Then we will end here. And
I actually have another question, if that's okay?
Yes, sure.
Or maybe a couple of questions. Okay, so the first one is going back to text 27 to 29 of the chapter 10.
Yeah.
Where it's talking about the path of karma kanda and how the danger of karma kanda is that one gets material enjoyment, like heavenly enjoyment, and becomes attached to it, and becomes so attached to the material enjoyment that then one may end up becoming degraded to get material enjoyment through sinful activity. But my question was, because it's mentioned that by karma kanda, by fruitive activities, doing them according to the actual Vedic injunctions, one becomes purified. So if one becomes purified by doing that, then it seems that they would be elevated and not degraded. So then how is it that the performers of karma kanda, get dragged into sinful life?
Yeah.
Despite purification.
First, purification takes place if one performs it properly. That's the first thing you have said, properly. We know that if one performs 100 Ashvamedha Yagyas, one can go to become Indra, or if one performs for 1,000 lives or something like that, I don't know the exact number, but one performs the duties in Varnashram perfectly, one can even become Brahma. But to do things so perfectly in this material world is very unlikely. There's always some fault in one endeavor. So that's the first thing. Because if one performs karma kanda with the desire to go to the heavenly planets, one becomes purified, but one's endeavor is based factually on a material desire to get a better situation. And that means that one can be purified from one's reaction, but the tendency to enjoy is still in the heart. And when you come in a situation where sense gratification is 1,000 times more easy to obtain, and the conditioning is 1,000 times more deeply by the modes of nature, then it becomes very difficult to resist. One becomes attached to the enjoyment. If one becomes attached to the enjoyment, what happens? Dayate Vasyapam Sansangastes Vajayate Sangasayate Kama Koda Vajayate. Kama Koda comes, that one becomes polluted again. So it's a very risky business of going there. And Krishna says, don't do it. It's too risky. That and we see Indra is there, all his pastimes with Indra. We see that sometimes he falls also to allurements which are not so nice. So if Indra gets to that, what with us as we get there? And that would be my contemplation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Raj, I have another question from text 33. In the purport it says, a conditioned soul considers himself to be in control of his life, but since he does not have any actual controlling potency, his situation is contradictory and not at all pleasing. So I was wondering about this fact of not having any actual controlling potency, because since we're parts and parcels of Krishna and Krishna is the supreme controller, then just, we often say that because Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, then we also have this, Ananda Maya Vyasa, this tendency towards happiness, which is actually the nature of the soul. So wouldn't it also be somewhat the nature of the soul to have at least a tiny, that we're qualitatively one with Krishna, so he's the supreme controller, we should also have some tiny controlling power?
Yeah, we have a tiny controlling power. But like you said, it's really tiny. It's like the law of karma. I was a few weeks ago in New Mayapur, and Gopaswami Prabhu is been a general medical practitioner for all his life. He's now retired, and he spoke about in Ayurveda and so what they say of the law of karma. Because when there is the law of karma, then what's the use of the medical science? Everyone has to go to his karma, and the doctor, yeah, what can he do? But it is said, yes, we get our reactions, but we have some small freedom to improve. But finally, you will get a disease, finally you have to die, all these things, but you have a scope of trying to improve. If you have the right medicine, the right treatment, then you will improve and the suffering will be less. But that's tiny, like you said. That's the same in your example. We have a tiny yeah, we have the possibility to control a bit, but that's limited to the control that Krishna gives us. But it's also a devotee knows not only that, we know also another way, and that's that I found important to consider. Krishna is in our heart, and he gives out the reactions of our karma. And we have so much karma, but he decides which reaction we are going to get at a certain moment. So it's always worthwhile to pray to Krishna. And hopefully he gives us a reaction not the most heavy, but then we can chant Hare Krishna and perform devotional service and become purified of our reaction. It's like in King Nrija. King Nrija, Krishna tells you he went to, he gave charity, and then he gave one cow to a Brahmin, and the Brahmin came back into the herd and he gave it the same cow to another Brahmin, and then there was a discussion between the Brahmins, and they cursed them both, and anyway came a lizard, and but when he came before Yamaraj, he said, you have so much good piety, but you have done that one thing. What do you want first? Your bad reactions or your good reactions? And he said, I want the bad first. And Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, that was not very intelligent. He had to ask, it was better he asked first the good reaction and then perform devotional service and get rid of your karma altogether. So in that sense, we can ask Krishna, please, if you want, that so then I can, when I'm more peaceful, I can do better my service, if you so desire. But that's the only thing we can do. Does that help to understand that? Anyway.
Yes, Maharaj.
There are certainly more points to say, but that's what Krishna gives me for the moment.
And then last thing was also in relation to this text 33 in the translation itself. It says, those who accept the material concept of life, taking the variegatedness of the material modes of nature to be factual. So my question was that it's saying that it seems to be saying that the variegatedness of the modes of material nature is not factual. That only people who are in the material concept, they see it that way. So, yeah, before we were saying that the material world is real, but what's not real is our relationship with it or our situation in it. So, but here it seems to be saying that the material world is not real.
Yeah, the spice of enjoyment, Srila Prabhupada says, is in the variety. So when we have prasadam with all the tastes. There are different tastes, a big variety. It's good for your health and it's nice for the tongue. It's an enjoyment. The variety is a spice for enjoyment. But finally, all this variety is illusory because it's for the body. It's not for the spirit soul. It's not for us. We identify with the body, and because the mind enjoys, we think we are enjoying. So that's the point. Finally, this variety is also illusion. That in the material world, the real variety is in the spiritual world.
So we shouldn't see the right way to see it is not that there are all these different things, but that there's only one thing. It's all just Krishna's energy.
It's Krishna's energy and it's Krishna's variety, and that's wonderful. Yes, it's Krishna's energy, but always we know this is Krishna's illusory potency. The real thing is in the spiritual world. There you have the real variety, because that's only temporary here, and therefore it's illusion. In the sense, yeah, this variety is also illusory. Because that's material nature. It appears in so many forms. If you see this body, it's built up from earth. It's earth transformed. It gets a certain form. And so a plant gets another form. And then another form. So much variety, but it's all illusion because we have nothing to do with these forms. And then we try to exploit these other forms in the material. So that is the biggest illusion. Yeah. So that's what I understand.
Maharaj, thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. And we see each other tomorrow. We will go further into the symptoms of conditioned and liberated souls and see how this leads us to bhakti. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Recording stopped.